Today's cycling adventure is going to be a 60-kilometer route from the coastal resorts of Lanzarote, Puerto del Carmen, etc., up onto the central plateau and then through the volcanic park. So we're starting out in Puerto del Carmen at the end near the airport. On the cycle path there's a cycle route that takes you right around the airport. In fact, nowadays it takes you all the way into and then through Arrecife and then out the other side. But for our purposes, once we get to the end of the airport, we're going to be turning left and going up along the side of Playa Honda, between the airport and Playa Honda. You can look at my other videos for the full route. So this is probably the best low traffic route out. The sad fact is if you're in one of the coastal resorts, then getting up onto that central highland basically requires you to navigate through some busy traffic. This is the route that has the briefest period of navigation through busy traffic. And this is the worst bit of it. There's a double roundabout set at the single exit from Playa Honda, and that brings you through that onto the road that then runs up towards San Bartolome. This road is very steep. Here's a nice still shot that gives you an idea of it. So it's a good argument for having an e-bike if you're going to be doing it. It's also quite busy, but don't worry, we're not staying on it all the way up. It will join the busier road from Arrecife here. On the road to the volcano park, just having done the climb out of San Bartolome. Once you've got up here, you start to get the good views of various volcanoes around the island. We're still a good distance from the volcanic park at this point, but the cycling has got a lot more pleasant. So basically the way the geographical structure of the island works is there is a large plain at about 300 meters in height that covers most of the island, with the peaks then rising out of it. And then so the coastal strip means any direction you cycle from the coast, the first thing you're going to do is have to cycle up to that plain. That's about a 300-meter ascent, and it's pretty much steep in anywhere you are on the island. It also means if you do the coast-to-coast cycle, and my next video is going to be that, going down to Ferrara, you have to go down and then you have to come back up again. So you're doing about 600 meters of ascent during the day. So this is San Bartolome itself. There's a lovely little square in the center of it. And one of the benefits of getting around Lanzarote by bicycle rather than by car is that in the towns, which are all these very, very narrow streets that are tricky enough to navigate, you can actually stop and pop into a coffee shop, pop into a bar, have a look at the monuments without having to spend ages trying to find somewhere to park your car. They can be a bit of a nightmare that way if you're actually driving around, and particularly if any of you have gone to the market in Guime on a Sunday. So my next video, as I said, I'm going to be doing Ferrara, but I'm also going to call to Guime on that, so you might want to give the channel a follow at this point. The other one I have in the works is a video that takes you into and out of the airport, in case you're thinking of cycling from the airport, which a lot of people might now be doing. There's a developing cycle touring route. Cycle touring is my main thing that runs through most of the Canary Islands, and that a lot of people actually start in Lanzarote. So if you're sitting in Puerto del Carmen having a beer and you see somebody very dusty cycling by on a bike with two big bags on the back or other configurations of luggage, that's probably what they're doing. They do a loop of Lanzarote before getting the ferry. So I've got out of San Bartolome, and that's basically where the severe climbing onto this central plateau I'm now on ends. It's then, it's actually relatively flat once you're on this. I mean, there's a little bit of up and down, but it really flattens out quite a lot. So yeah, the reality is in Lanzarote, if you're staying in any of the coastal resorts and you want to do anything but cycle the coastal path, the first thing you have is about 6 kilometers of very steep ascent with a fair bit of traffic on it. And it's kind of a shame they wouldn't use a couple of the dirt roads to maybe put cycle paths in that would take you up to that sort of San Bartolome Yiaza level, so you could skip the worst of the traffic at least. You're not going to skip the climbs, they're inevitable. particular if you're in Lanzarote in January or February or into March, you'll probably see a fair amount of lycra-clad cyclists if you're cycling these roads on the plateau, and that's because it's used basically for training by a lot of cyclists, including a lot of professional cyclists. So maybe you'll be passed by somebody who's normally going into the Tour de France. The good weather and the good quality roads on the Central Plateau make it very attractive. It's also kind of very perfect distances if you're trying to rebuild fitness after the winter in Europe. It's always quite funny though, because they'll often pass you at quite a lick. It can be quite impressive altogether. So here we're passing through the edge of Tiana, which is actually a pretty big town in itself. There's lots of alternate routes, by the way, you can take on the plateau. This particular one is taking you out through one of the suburbs, around the other side of one of the volcanic hills from the main road. And I like this one in particular because it has a very nice view once you get past that volcanic peak, looking down into the Timanfaya National Park. Just here, yes, I really enjoy this particular view. And as you get down towards the boundary of the park, there's also a couple of places where you can go for walks around the volcanoes. And I'd actually recommend doing that. It's very interesting to actually walk through the part that you're allowed walk. They mostly don't want people walking on this landscape because you do damage to it. But what they have done is there's 2 or 3 routes that are approved walking, and one of them is even a cycling route if you were going to use a gravel bike. So here, this is the interpretive centre. It's worth popping into for a big understanding of how the volcanoes in the island work. It's free, it's got a toilet, it's also got a shop that sells ice cream, which at this stage of the cycle can be quite a benefit. That photograph in there, that's from a previous cycle. This particular day when I'm doing the route, it's very sunny, and unfortunately that does tend to wash out the colours. The best days to do it are the days that are actually quite overcast. You get a much better idea of all the different colours that are in the landscape. They look less uniformly black and washed out, basically. So here we're coming up to the turning into Timanfaya itself. I don't think you can cycle the bus route in that. Like everybody else, you'd you'd cycle in, park at the restaurant, and then get the bus that loops around the rest of the park. But it does make a good point to stop and get a good picture of a bike lean that you can then show your friends when you get home. And when you're doing this climb on the way up, you can sort of squeeze a bike in here to stop at the side of the road and look down into the landscape of the Timanfaya bit of the park that the bus drives around, and get a good idea of what that looks like. So this is the other kind of climb on the route coming up, and then that brings you into this massively long and very straight descent down into Yiaza, rather. And again, here you'll see me being passed by proper cyclists, doing a much faster pace. I particularly like the way the clouds unwind here. So here, I made an error with the camera. We're missing about 1 kilometre, but it's this little section here that takes you through Yiaza and then back up onto the LZ2. So LZ2, absolutely terrible to cycle on because it's very fast and there's a lot of traffic. We're just going to be on it very briefly, and there is a wide shoulder for this bit, so it's not as bad as it could be. The other option would be to go back up into the hills and then down into Tiez, which is a good bit longer. But the point here is we can turn off very quickly after only a couple of kilometers and take the road that runs down to Puerto Caldo, which is where the marina is. And just before you get down to Puerto Caldo itself, you can turn left basically here, and this road will now take us back to Puerta del Carmen, basically into the top left corner. Up, if you go past the Biosphere shopping centre and keep heading out of town, that's the corner we're going to arrive into. So once we're up there, it's just a question of finding your way back down into Puerta del Carmen itself. And so here on this particular route, I'm bringing you back down into the harbour area because I think most people will know where that is. It's a fairly straightforward place to navigate to. And if you've ever done this on a bike, you'll also know it's a bit easy to get lost and get stuck in the one-way. So for this bit, I'm actually pushing the bike to get back to the coastal path. So coming down towards that little beach where there's all the scuba diving classes, something I haven't got around to doing in Lanzarote yet, but I do intend to in future. And once you're coming through that, you're coming back up. This bit's always really crowded. There's lots of people, so you're not in a rush. You can take it slowly enough. You're coming around the back. This section is basically the oldest section of the tourist town. It's got all the nice small villas, and then you come around by the monstrosity of the hotel and back onto the coastal cycle path. So this will take us all the way back to the starting point. I ran the camera there because depending on where you're staying, you'll be more or less familiar with the different sections of it. Hope you've enjoyed this. As I said, I normally do e-bike touring. Have a look at my other videos. You'll find me going all over Spain, Scotland and Ireland, and then also explaining how e-bike touring works, what sort of luggage to get and all that sort of stuff. But here, this is a holiday trip for me that I make most years in January, and it's part of my process of building up my fitness again after winter, but not at the level of the lycra-clad lads and lassies we were passing up in the mountains. They're quite a little bit ahead of me. Hope you've enjoyed it. Maybe look into the touring aspect, and if you do, maybe one day I shall see you on the road.